Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. Welcome to my guest, Callum Laing. He's the founder of the Veblen Director Programme and partner at the Unity Group. He's got over 25 years of entrepreneurial experience across various countries, industries and businesses, and right now focuses on helping small businesses access capital markets. In fact, since 2015, when he joined Unity Group, he's completed over 100 M&A transactions. He's the author of 4 business books and publisher of over 2,500 interviews. He's held significant positions, including High Commissioner to Singapore for the World Business Angel Forum. We discuss leadership, leaders as forces for good, and Callum's new book, Boardroom Blueprint. As such, we've made a donation to the Business for Good community, Callum's charity of choice, as a thank you to him for joining us. Hi, Callum. Thanks very much for joining me. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your career and your books, including the Boardroom Blueprint.
Thanks, Jeremy. So born in New Zealand, grew up in Cambridge in the UK, and have been sort of hustling and starting various ventures ever since I was a kid. My first grown-up business was a recruitment company at the height of the dot-com boom. So putting IP engineers into telcos during those glory years, which was a lot of fun until the bubble burst. And that's when I learned the real lessons about entrepreneurship. But by then I was also kind of broken and couldn't be an employee again. So have been an entrepreneur ever since. Most of that time has been actually out in Asia. So I was in Thailand for a while, been living in Singapore for the last 15 years, and kind of run global businesses now. So the last 10 years has really been focused on putting together old economy, good small businesses. So owner operated, typically kind of doing $1 million to $5 million of EBIT, putting groups of those together under a public holdco, but leaving the founders in control. And then, to your point on books, I started writing books just to kind of share questions that I was getting. It's easier just to send people to my book or give people a copy of my book rather than repeat the answers. So Progressive Partnerships was the first book I wrote, which is really about how startups and early stage businesses can scale by leveraging off what other people have, specifically their brand and their trust, and how you make those partnerships work. Agglomeration or Agglomerate was the next book, which I co-wrote with my business partner, which was about this idea of grouping together small businesses to give them scale and taking them public. Then I wrote Entrepreneurial Investing, which was kind of that same concept, but from the investor's standpoint. You've got 50% of the world's economy is locked up in these small businesses. They're bigger than startups, so they don't. So bigger than startups, so they don't have nearly as much media attention as startups do. They're too small for private equity or the public markets. But that's 50% of the GDP, and it's 90% of private sector employment, and there's no financial product that allows sophisticated investors to get access to that. So that's what that book was about. And then kind of by virtue of doing what I was doing, I ended up on lots of boards and advising boards and hiring for boards and firing from boards, and realized that was a very dysfunctional in many cases process, and that a lot of very talented people were being overlooked for board seats because they hadn't gone to the right schools, they didn't look a certain way, they didn't know the right people, and quite a few people that really shouldn't be on boards were on boards. And so I set up a program called the Veblen Director Programme to help people get their first board seat, and kind of use some of the tips and tools that I had learned to help people get in to their first board seat. And obviously, once you're on your first board seat, it becomes very easy to get more board seats. So the book is really about those experiences and the experiences of more than 200 of my clients now that have got more than 300 board seats. So yeah, that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
That's quite a journey, Callum, I would say. And you're almost classed as prolific as an author now. I think you need a couple more under your belt, but that'll get there.
Well, every one I've done, I've always said will be my last.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's right. We share we share similar paths in some ways. Although I started my .com business right at the bust, and
yeah,
after a
I wouldn't
dramatic failure, I had a very similar sort of view to you. Is I can't go back to traditional corporate. I've got to find something different different to do, and
yeah.
that entrepreneurial bent and spirit has followed me everywhere. And I would just want to pick your brains on that one for those tuning in. What is the difference from your perspective of entrepreneurial leadership versus, if you like, traditional corporate leadership?
Um, Look, I used to be quite snobby about, if you haven't gone through that process of being a small business owner and putting everything on the line and sacrificing your own salary to pay for other people, you really didn't understand business. I've kind of softened my stance somewhat. I think, to be successful in a corporate world, you also have to be quite entrepreneurial. You have to figure out, bless you, you have to figure out how to solve problems. You have to figure out how to bring people together and collaborate. And so I think that there are clearly differences, and I think it's obviously much more personal when it's your own money. But I think what I've kind of come to learn over the years is that actually a lot of it comes down to personal drive and ambition. And for me, the leaders that are best are the ones that have that drive and ambition, that just constantly want to change things and use whatever resources are available to them in order to do that. And in a corporate, you are constrained in some ways and you have more resources in many other ways. And as a business owner, you have the sort of the reverse of that.
And an extension to that, Callum, is that drive and ambition must come with a sense of self-development in this speed-driven world that we're in. We're operating in a digital world. What would you say to leaders who are rooted in 20th century leadership and are still procrastinating around being a leader for a digital world in terms of their own learning journey, as well as the transformations that they're needing to lead internally?
Good luck. It's yeah. Look, the reality is that things are moving too quickly. You don't need to be. I think you don't need to be an expert in these things, but you've got to take the time to get involved, and you've got to be able to understand them so that you can put smarter people around you and have the right conversations. And it is tempting to, it moves so quickly and there's always something new. It is tempting just to kind of take your foot off, but yeah, nobody wants to go in and learn a new interface and learn new ways of doing things again. But ultimately, it's a choice you make, and if you want to be relevant, I think the only choice you've got is to keep learning. I don't see another way around it.
I happen to agree with you, although from my experience, it's surprising when I come across leaders who don't think that way, and I can't quite compute in my own head. And like you say, good luck.
It is quite interesting. I find I think when you've been on the entrepreneurial journey, basically you face failure much more often and much earlier than many people do that have joined a corporation. And I think it's when you face failure that you start looking around for different answers and asking better questions. And often by default, you fall into personal development of sorts. And if you're anything like me, that probably happened after your first failed business, and you kind of look, a lot of it's nonsense, but there's a lot of good stuff in there as well. And then because we were doing it 25 years ago, it seems so natural now. And yeah, definitely I come across people all the time that have been in the corporate world and they've just never needed to explore sort of personal development. What they've needed to do is focus on doing the right things internally. They haven't needed to build a network outside of their company. They haven't needed to think beyond how they get promoted in their own career. And then when things do go wrong and they find themselves outed for whatever reason, suddenly it's a bit of a wake up call, and then they discover Tony Robbins and they go, "Wow, this is amazing." What? Yeah, if you've never come across these concepts before, of constantly challenging yourself and learning, then it is new and challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I hear you on that. It's very interesting. And going back to something that you also mentioned, the more enlightened leaders who get it and acknowledge that, they demonstrate that vulnerability, if you like, and that courage to say, you know what, I'm not the smartest person in the room, never was, in fact, and need some help. So who are the smart people I can have around me? And also where are the smart people and companies outside of our organization that can help us? And in your book, Progressive Partnerships, you talk about that a lot. And what would you say to leaders who are sort of on the fence around this, about the power of strategic and operational partnerships like that?
Look, I think any successful business, you can look at those periods in their history where they've done strategic partnerships, and it's the business kind of takes off, and it's a pivotal moment. And so where I kind of position it from in progressive partnerships is, it's quite easy to think about it when and this is how I learned. I was a struggling entrepreneur in a country where I didn't know anyone, didn't speak the language, didn't have any money. All I could do was leverage off other people's stuff. So I had to figure out how to do that, how to frame what I needed in a way that gave them what they wanted. And so that became the whole idea. And I think, that kind of idea of collaboration beats competition has permeated through everything that we do. Like, if you take small business owners, often small business owners are quite insular, and they're not, a small business that's doing 10, 20 million in revenue is not worth very much. You put 10 of those together and you've now got a $200 million business, or £200 million business. And that's got firepower, and that's not got negotiating power, and it's got more career options and all these other elements. And so there's definitely value in doing it. And I think what happens is, a lot of people tend to try it once and it doesn't work. And oftentimes what happens is, we look at who would be our perfect partner, and then we go on and knock on the door and tell them exactly what we want. And weirdly, they don't care. And we go, "Oh, partnerships are rubbish." Or we do a partnership and then they don't deliver what we feel like they should have delivered on the deal. And so it's all their fault. And I think kind of what I learned on the progressive partnerships journey is that, you've really got to start with figuring out how to help as many people as possible get what they want. And the more you can do that, the bigger the problem you can solve for them, the more valuable you become. And ultimately, that's what gives you the power. But you've got to start small, and got to start with helping as many other people as possible.
Yeah, that very true. And I think with the need with that speed element as well, and with the need for very specific capabilities or different perspectives, even in the same industry, then these are going to become even more powerful moving forward. Because I mean, looking at the startup ecosphere in some industries, it's like it's best to be with them and nurture them rather than compete, as you say.
Yeah.
Going back to a point that you made about boards, my ears pricked up then. I sit on a number of boards as well, and my own focus is very much around leading in the digital world, digital transformation, well, whole business transformation, if you like. But one of the big issues that I found on the boards that I sit on is that the some of the executive board members have been absolutely fantastic leaders, business people in the last century. So they're great at finance, they're great at this, but they don't get how the space is changing from a digital perspective, how the workforce is changing. What would be your message to companies that are reliant on their advisors like this, and how they need to evolve the skill sets at board level?
Yeah, look, I think there's, I mean, first of all, I think most companies don't have boards, and that's the biggest problem. There's 330 million companies out there in the world. Less than 1% of those companies has an active functioning board. And yet every single successful business you can point to has an active functioning board. So what are the rest of us doing? Like there's, and I think basically most entrepreneurs feel like a board is something that you only get when you're a big enough company. And I would argue that even if you're a single person startup, you should put together a board of advisors around you and start to have that accountability and get that advice. And there's a lot of people out there that'd be willing to do that for you. But to your point, there's no point having somebody on an advisory board if you don't listen to them. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to give you great advice, and everybody comes from their own backgrounds. And oftentimes, one of the things that I talk about for startups is pull together an advisory board of, the easy one to get is board middle managers in big companies who they would love to sit on your advisory board because now they can live vicariously through you, the exciting entrepreneur. Now they've got something to talk about at dinner parties. And when they talk at the board meeting, you have to listen to them. And that's very exciting for them. Now, oftentimes, even with the best will in the world, the advice they're going to give you after a lifetime in middle management and a big corporate is irrelevant for a small business. Like it's just not useful. However, you can leverage the fact that they're working for this big corporate to tell your clients that you've got someone from this corporate on your board. You can leverage them for their connections. You can there's a lot of other things that you can do. So, and look, some of the advice that they give you might be absolutely spot on. They're likely to understand their industry much better than you do, and there's lessons that they can learn from that. So, I do think if you're going to have advisors, you need to learn from them. I think when it comes to digital, it is a challenge. I do kind of go back to a story that I've shared before, but I was an eye opener to me because I came from a .com tech background. I then went into mobile value added services, did one of the first video streamings in Thailand. Loved being cutting edge technology. That was my space. I loved that. And I got into SMS marketing very early on, and I was talking to, there was a woman who had a big 500 person marketing, below the line marketing agency in Thailand. And I got a meeting with her and I went to see her to tell her to try and sell her on SMS marketing. And this is kind of early 2000s, this is sort of ringtones and logos type era. It was pre-iPhone. And I was telling her about, you could do location specific and really kind of focused on the technology. And she said, did you check my website before you came here? And I said, actually, no, I didn't. And she said, well, that's because I haven't got a website. And I was like, what? And this was early 2000. Like even the Luddites had websites at that point. They weren't great websites, but they were websites. And she didn't have one. And she said, look, I know every single client in my market. They know me. They know exactly what to get. And the new technology is great, but it's not going to improve my business. Like, it's not going to help me make more money. I don't need a website because I don't need those things. I don't need mobile tech because I don't need those things. And it was a big wake up call for me. And this was a person that was making a lot of money. It did kind of force me to get out of my little tech bubble and also to realize that actually cutting edge tech's great. It's not typically where the money is. Things tend to take quite a long time to catch up. So yeah, look, it's a double-edged sword, and I think executives have to try and balance what's coming with what they've got, and make the best decision with the information they've got.
Yeah, agreed. And I go back to something that you were saying in there. You mentioned the client here. This is the first time that we've talked about the client. As entrepreneurs, as leaders in any businesses, ultimately, it's about our clients, which then would help us grow our business and move forward that way, either through partnerships or not, as the case may be. So a lot of organizations seem to, and even leaders have lost sight of that. In some ways, those that aren't transforming fast enough are fighting that short-term battle, but they're missing the long-term. It's starting to become internalized. So how do you argue for leaders to get back to value creation for the clients and for their business or themselves if they're an entrepreneur as well, and what have you, versus short-term value delivery?
Yeah, I think this is an epidemic problem right now, and we before this started, we touched on diversity, but I think what happens a lot now is people latch onto ideas and get obsessed with process, and especially in big companies, they forget the reason why they've started something. So, you look at a department like procurement, which never found anyone that thinks procurement's a good idea apart from people in procurement. And it's often because they've just lost sight of why they're doing it. And so that they stop helping the company move ahead. And so you see this all the time. And obviously, like right now, we have a big focus on helping people get their first board seats. And a big part of that is getting diversity onto board seats. And if you look at the conversation, and it's often the people that are most passionate and most concerned about diversity, and they've completely lost sight of why you have diversity. They're so focused on let's get diversity on the board that they've forgotten why you want diversity. Like it's got to be tied back to the end result. It's got to be tied back to a net improvement for the business. And I think this sort of is a little bit where I was with that tech conversation. Was I'd got caught up in the tech and not the end result, which was making more money for the client. Nobody cares about the tech. Nobody cares about diversity for the sake of diversity. What they care about is fresh ideas, what value adds. It's way to take the business to the new level. And you can't get to the best decisions if you've got 6 people sitting around the room that all went to the same schools, all are in the same industry, all at the same age. Like you just can't think differently. But again, it kind of gets lost. And I see this happening over and over again in sales processes, where people look at a sales process and they start obsessing about, well, this part of the process, like let's improve this bit of the process, and it all becomes completely disjointed from the end customer. And I think the bigger the company, the harder it is to pull it right back to, are we actually doing what we need to do to solve a problem for a client and get money off them. And yeah, I do see that this is a really, really big problem. And it's kind of that missing the signal for the noise that I see happening a lot.
Yeah, and something that resonated there was that the importance of that diversity of thinking, particularly now as it's more uncertain, but at the same time, far more possibilities out there. The creation of value we don't even know exists yet, particularly with what's coming around the corner. You also talk about the lack of experience excuse. Could you explain that a little bit more and how you break through that?
In relation to boardrooms?
Yeah, in relation to boardrooms, but then how that permeates through the business.
Yes. This is kind of it. So a lot of our clients are kind of in there. I mean, we've got people from 25 up to mid 70s, but the sort of the bell curve is mid to late 40s that kind of thinks, okay, well, board seat would be a good thing to get next. What's a board seat? How do I get one? And you suddenly go through this process that is exactly like the beginning of your career, where you go and apply for a board seat and they say, well, I'm sorry, you can't have a board seat, you haven't got experience. And you go, well, hang on. I did this when I was 16. You wouldn't give me a job because I didn't have experience, and I couldn't get that experience because I couldn't get a job. And that's kind of how the board world is. So the way that we solve this problem for our clients is to basically start creating boards. So if you think about that statement I made earlier, that less than 1% of all businesses have boards. So any advert that you see for a board position, first of all, it's rubbish. They've already filled the position. They know who's going in there, and more than likely it's a recruitment company that's just fishing for CVs. So don't apply for it. But even if it was a genuine offer for a board position, you've got everyone that wants board seats applying for less than 1% of the companies in the world that actually have these. So you've got a lot of people in there, which by definition puts you in a bad position. And for the hirer, they're always going to go with the safe option, somebody that's got board experience. If you go and create a board and even start with an advisory board for a company, then by definition, there's no competition. You're creating it for them. You're going to bring in 4 or 5 interesting people for them because you're setting it up. You are on the board, and nobody asks to look at your CV. They just assume you know what you're doing if you're setting this up. So that's kind of how you get that first bit of experience. When you get into publicly listed companies, the way that we approach it there, and look, I understand, since 2008, 2009, the global financial crisis, investors have put a lot of pressure onto boards to have diversity. There's a lot of talk in the media about diversity, and very little has changed. And the reason very little has changed is that it's incredibly difficult to manage a bunch of egos around the table. Like even a small committee, but a boardroom, when you're talking about millions of dollars, when you're under huge scrutiny from investors and media and staff and everyone else, the bigger the company, the more responsibility, the less directors want to take a risk. And so even when everyone around the table knows they need diversity in the room, if they get that hire wrong, if they hire somebody from a different background that they don't know and they get it wrong, and that person turns out to be either useless or disruptive, they've got 2 choices, and they're not good choices. The first is you fire them. Now, if you're a board and you hire someone and then fire them, the whole board looks incompetent and the share price plummets, and that's an expensive mistake. Or you put up with them, and the average tenure of a board is 9 years. That's a long time to put up with someone that's being a pain. And so consequently, most boards do nothing. And so the way that we got around that is we would go to public companies and say, hey, let us set up an apprentice board for you. Now, an apprentice board doesn't cost you anything. You don't give votes. You don't pay the apprentices. They just sit in on your meetings quietly. They don't say anything unless they're asked. They just see your communications. That's it. Now, then you can put together a very diverse apprentice board. You can go out to the market and say, hey, look at how forward thinking we are with putting together this diverse apprentice board. But there's no risk, and it's very easy. Also, the expectation of an apprentice is nothing. Like, they're just there to learn. What we teach all of our members at Veblen is now go and do all the work that directors hate doing. So, for example, most directors are terrible at investor relations. Most companies are just atrocious at investor relations. So if you offer to help talk to investors, that's a weight off their shoulders that they'll be very grateful. There's not a government in the world right now that isn't passing ESG regulations. And I guarantee you there's not a director in the world that is rubbing their hands together going, woohoo, more ESG reporting. Great. And so as an apprentice, you can say, well, would you like me to take care of all the ESG reporting? You suddenly become the most popular person in the boardroom. Like, that's awesome. Yes, you go and do that for us. And basically, as an apprentice, you've now got a year to massively over deliver on what they were expecting, to build relationships with these board members. And then at the end of the year, they know you, they like you, they trust you, you've delivered results. It's very easy for them to make you a full non-exec director because they're not taking a risk at that point. They've seen what you can do. And so it's a really, we call it a Trojan horse. It's a great way of getting into what was otherwise an almost impenetrable exclusive club.
Some great food for thought there for boards, organizations, etc. I love the idea of the apprentice board, actually, the mutual benefit of that, which is quite clear, which somewhere sits alongside an advisory board in a way, I guess. And I really like that from a diversity of thinking perspective. And ultimately, though, getting these things in place, like you said, is that if you haven't thought of having a board and you have something like that in place, then the probability is that you're going to find a way forward to create more value, to build a business and so on.
Exactly.
So it's been a great conversation, Callum. And to leave, I for those tuning in, I'd love to get sort of 3 or 4 lessons you've learned as a leader, entrepreneur, investor, board officer that you can pass on that others can learn from.
So I think you'll know that as you kind of go through, you learn different lessons that are applicable at different times. I think one that has been probably the primary one for me is always be thinking about who already knows the answer to the problem that you're trying to solve, who would benefit the most if you're successful in this venture, and just get out and start talking to more people. And I think that's that's really the thing that has made the biggest difference for me. I think I went through, so a lot of successful entrepreneurs take their companies public. They get beaten up in the stock market, and then they come off the market and swear they'll never do that again because it was brutal. We were stupid enough to keep going back and try and learn those lessons. And I think one of the things that became very clear very early on is entrepreneurs kind of assume that everyone else thinks like us. We're constantly sacrificing profit in the short term to create value in the long term. And we assume that everybody else shares that mindset. And investors don't. Investors create value by making profit as opposed to making profit by creating value. And that sounds like semantics, but it's an incredibly important distinction. And so if they can short you or sell at the wrong, most inopportune time, but it allows them to make profit, which allows them to create value for their investors, then that's what they've got to do. And where the clash comes is when you've got these two different ideologies. And so you've got investors that think entrepreneurs are morons because they keep chucking profit back into the company rather than taking it out. And you've got entrepreneurs that think investors are unethical snakes that are dead set against them. And neither is true. Well, there's an element of truth on both sides, probably. But the game is really understanding that there are multiple games being played, and you can't start to win those games until you understand who's playing what games. And so I think that's been a big and very valuable lesson for me is understanding those two things.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sure that a lot of those listening will want to continue the conversation, find out more, get hold of your books. How do they do all that, Callum?
Cool. So the social media that I'm most active on is LinkedIn. If you mention this podcast when you connect with me, I'll accept the connection. If you want any of the books, if you go to callumlaing.com and stick your email address in, I'll send you copies of all of the books. I think Bezos probably has enough money without selling more of my books. So feel free to do that. And yeah, love to connect with you.
Great. Well, Callum, thanks very much for joining me. What a conversation. Lots of food for thought. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Jeremy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blaine. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.